January 15, 1944, the frozen silence of the Italian front. In a shattered olive grove near Cassino, a lone Allied gunner kneels beside his Browning M1919 machine gun. The air is brittle, heavy with the smell of burnt cordite and damp earth. Across the valley, German positions hide behind stone terraces, waiting for the first flash of return fire. But this gunner doesn't reveal himself. When his weapon roars, no burst of light cuts through the smoke. No telltale flicker betrays his post. From behind a collapsed wall, he fires 60 rounds, precise, steady, without a single muzzle flash to mark his position. The enemy scours the slopes in confusion, convinced the shots came from elsewhere. This was no trick of luck, no miracle of chance. It was the result of one man's method, a calculated understanding of fire, pressure, and light, a technique that turned survival into science. And it began with the desperate problem every gunner faced that winter. By early 1944, the war in Italy had become a brutal contest of endurance. After the fall of Naples, the Allies were pushing north, aiming for Rome. But every hill, every village had become a fortress under German control. The Gustav Line, anchored at Monte Cassino, was one of the most formidable defensive networks in Europe. Deep trenches, stone bunkers, and cleverly camouflaged machine gun nests stretched from coast to coast. For Allied infantrymen and gunners, movement was agony. The Germans' MG-42s cut through advancing troops with terrifying precision. The moment an Allied gun opened fire, its muzzle flash gave away the position, and German mortars answered within seconds. Entire crews were wiped out before they could relocate. In this unforgiving landscape, visibility was everything. Each trigger pull risked exposure. Every flash of light was a death sentence. Gunners quickly learned to value concealment more than aggression. Some began experimenting, altering firing angles, shielding barrels, even using wet cloths and improvised hoods to diffuse light. Among these men were seasoned veterans of North Africa, soldiers who had fought Rommel's Afrika Korps under the burning desert sun. They understood heat, dust, and mirage, and how light behaved under different conditions. Now in Italy's cold mountains, that knowledge evolved into survival craft. The British and American armies were also studying the issue systematically. Reports from the Ordnance Department and the British Small Arms School described experiments with flash hiders, cone-shaped attachments fitted to the muzzle to reduce the visible burst of flame. Yet in field conditions, factory-made solutions often failed. Mud, oil, and barrel wear made the problem unpredictable. That's where individual ingenuity took over, soldiers learning to adapt, to think beyond manuals. One of them would go further than anyone expected, redefining the art of invisible fire. The man behind the method wasn't an engineer but a frontline gunner, a corporal attached to an Allied infantry division operating near the Liri Valley. His unit's survival often depended on maintaining fire without detection, and for weeks he watched fellow crews fall victim to counterfire the moment their guns lit up. Every tracer, every spark was an invitation for the enemy's mortars. The gunner began to notice patterns, how flash visibility changed with temperature, ammunition type, and the position of the sun. He realized that the bright flare seen at night wasn't simply from the bullet itself, but from unburnt powder igniting at the muzzle. That meant it could be manipulated, controlled. In his field notes, later referenced in post-war weapons studies, he described testing different ammunition belts, cleaning methods, and even the angle of barrel elevation. His idea was simple yet revolutionary. Reduce oxygen flow at the muzzle by modifying the cooling jacket's front vent and layering it with mud and oil residue. The residue cooled and absorbed part of the expanding gas, preventing the classic burst of orange light. His fellow soldiers were skeptical until they saw it. When he fired, there was sound, recoil, vibration, but no flash. His machine gun seemed to vanish into the landscape, the bullets appearing from nowhere. During the battles near Cassino, he applied this technique systematically, repositioning after every burst, counting rounds, controlling barrel heat like a surgeon monitoring pulse. The reports from his unit claimed he could fire up to 60 rounds, short bursts, without drawing enemy retaliation. To the Germans, it was as if a ghost gunner haunted the ridge. But his breakthrough didn't happen in isolation. It reflected a wider evolution in Allied fire discipline. The growing understanding that technology alone wouldn't win, adaptation and field would. That evolution would soon meet its greatest test, under full combat pressure, when every mistake burned bright in the dark. The first angle was human, the mindset of a soldier trapped between aggression and survival. Gunners were trained to dominate battlefields with firepower, but in Italy's mountain warfare, silence was power. The man behind the flash suppression method wasn't just clever, he was patient. He understood restraint, the discipline to fire only when the shot mattered and to make every burst invisible. His weapon became not an instrument of noise but a shadow. To his comrades, he was a reassurance, a steady rhythm in the chaos. When others fired blindly, he waited, breathing through the pauses, learning how enemy eyes searched for light. That patience became a weapon of its own. The second angle was tactical. The technique changed how small units operated. Normally, a machine gun's position anchored a defensive line, a fixed point that invited counterattack. But with flash suppression, a gun could move, fire, and reposition without alerting the enemy. This gave Allied squads a new kind of freedom, mobile firepower without immediate retribution. Reports from platoon leaders noted how the enemy's return fire began to scatter, unfocused, uncertain. German observers often misjudged where fire originated, wasting ammunition and exposing themselves to hidden Allied snipers. What began as a field improvisation soon reshaped entire small unit tactics in that sector. Then there was the psychological angle. Soldiers talk, and stories spread faster than orders. Soon, men across the line spoke of a ghost gunner who could fire unseen, whose weapon breathed without flame. To exhausted troops under constant threat of detection, it became a symbol of defiance, proof that even the simplest observation could tilt survival odds. But behind the myth was a man methodically refining his craft, balancing physics with instinct, determined to make his weapon both silent and unseen. And the enemy would soon learn just how dangerous that invisibility could become. The third angle was technological. Flash suppression was not just ingenuity. It was an interplay of mechanics and chemistry. Standard machine guns like the Browning M1919 expelled gas at high temperatures, igniting residual powder. Field experiments showed that slight modifications to the muzzle jacket, combined with carefully maintained ammunition, could absorb enough heat and redirect gases to prevent visible flare. This was subtle engineering executed in mud and oil rather than workshops, proving that innovation in war often came from the front line, not the factory. The fourth angle focused on leadership. Commanders quickly realized the potential. Platoon leaders integrated flash suppression into small unit doctrine, instructing gunners on positioning, barrel cooling, and burst length. It became part of training for reconnaissance support and ambush tactics. One report from February 1944 described a squad whose effectiveness doubled after adopting these methods. All because a single corporal had demonstrated what controlled fire could achieve. Leadership wasn't just issuing orders, it was observing, adapting, and empowering men to act on knowledge gained under fire. The fifth angle was enemy perception. German troops, accustomed to using muzzle flashes as guides, began to question their observations. Reports from German artillery logs mention rounds falling from nowhere and snipers recounting shots that seemed impossible. This uncertainty forced the enemy to alter their tactics, slowing advances and overcompensating with defensive fire. A single man's adaptation had ripple effects, subtly shaping battlefield decisions beyond his immediate unit. Finally, the moral angle cannot be ignored. War is not only about bullets and tactics, it is about human endurance and ingenuity. The gunner's method allowed him to fight effectively while minimizing exposure, preserving lives on both sides. It emphasized survival through skill rather than sheer aggression, highlighting the quiet courage that often goes unrecorded in conventional histories. These angles converged: human discipline, tactical advantage, mechanical understanding, leadership foresight, enemy uncertainty, and moral reasoning, setting the stage for the moment when the gunner would face his ultimate test under full-scale engagement. February 20th, 1944, the Leary Valley was alive with tension. Dawn broke over the jagged hills, fog lingering in the low valleys. Allied troops prepared to advance against entrenched German positions near Monte Cassino. Artillery fire had begun hours earlier, shaking the earth and rattling nerves. Every machine gun nest was alive with anticipation, every soldier bracing for the inevitable. The corporal took his place behind a shattered wall. His Browning M1919 was meticulously cleaned, its modified muzzle jacket layered with residual oil and mud, just as he had refined over weeks. Ammunition belts were inspected twice, ensuring powder consistency. The slightest miscalculation would betray his position. Around him, his squad watched in tense silence. At 07:13, the first German patrol emerged along a ridge silhouetted against the morning light. The gunner exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the weapon barked. 60 rounds spat out in controlled bursts. Each shot was silent in appearance. No flare betrayed his post. The bullets tore through the patrol, leaving confusion in their wake. German soldiers scrambled, searching for an origin that did not exist. Within minutes, more targets appeared. Machine gun crews, mortar teams, even a lone officer trying to coordinate counterfire. Every time the gunner fired, the enemy miscalculated. Their artillery fell short, mortars overshot. The fog of war thickened, not from weather, but from uncertainty. His squad repositioned, following strict intervals and pre-planned paths. Every movement was calculated to avoid drawing attention, every shot measured. By 0745, reports from nearby Allied units described the ridge as seemingly undefended, yet under constant fire. The ghostly weapon had become a force multiplier, a single man amplifying the lethality of his squad manyfold. And then, at 0752, the Germans began an organized counterattack. Mortars rained closer, reconnaissance units scanned systematically. For the first time, the gunner's concealment was under direct pressure. But the techniques he had honed, barrel, cooling, timed bursts, and silent repositioning, would soon determine the outcome of the morning engagement. By 0755, the German counterattack intensified. Mortar rounds landed in shattered trees and craters nearby. Dust and smoke filled the air. The gunners' squad held their ground, relying entirely on the unseen firepower of their Browning. Every calculated burst drew attention away from friendly positions, and every pause masked their presence. At 0802, a German sniper attempted to locate the weapon. He fired a series of shots toward likely firing points, but none struck the corporal or his squad. His careful choice of cover and precise muzzle management had rendered him invisible. The enemy's frustration grew. Artillery observers reported rounds falling erratically, while infantry advanced cautiously, fearing ambush. The gunner adjusted his aim, targeting the exposed flanks of advancing German squads. Short bursts, no flash, no trace, 60 rounds in all. By 0820, the ridge was effectively neutralized. The Germans had suffered significant casualties without ever pinpointing the gun's location. Allied troops advanced behind the screen of unseen fire, gaining ground while minimizing exposure. Observers later noted that this was one of the first practical demonstrations of flash suppression in full combat conditions. The method had been tested in trials, but the pressure of active engagement revealed its full value. The corporal's timing, restraint, and technical precision had turned theory into battlefield reality. By 0835, the immediate engagement ended. German forces retreated to secondary positions, wary of phantom gunners along the ridge. Allied command recorded the event in after-action notes, highlighting how controlled, invisible fire had reduced casualties and disrupted enemy coordination. The corporal and his squad had transformed a single machine gun into a psychological and tactical weapon. What began as an individual experiment had shaped the outcome of a larger assault, proving that ingenuity under fire could equal firepower itself. That day, one man's understanding of light, gas, and patience altered not only a battle but the approach to small unit engagements for months to come. In the hours following the engagement, the impact of the gunner's technique became evident. Allied commanders reviewed casualty reports. German losses were higher than expected, yet Allied losses were minimal. The ridge, once a lethal strongpoint, had been neutralized without the usual cost of frontal assaults. Soldiers spoke quietly among themselves, describing the ghost gunner whose weapon seemed to fire from nowhere. Field reports highlighted the tactical advantage. German troops, previously confident in using muzzle flashes to locate positions, now hesitated to expose themselves. Artillery units misjudged coordinates, snipers second-guessed angles, and patrols advanced cautiously. What had been a single man's innovation had introduced doubt into the enemy's calculations, a force multiplier without increasing troop numbers. Within the division, flash suppression became a topic of serious discussion. Commanders noted the effectiveness of combining mechanical modification with disciplined fire control. They circulated instructions on barrel cooling, timing bursts, and positioning behind natural cover. Manuals would later reference the importance of managing muzzle flare, but the battlefield demonstration in the Leary Valley provided a vivid example of theory in action. On a human level, the corporal's success boosted morale. Soldiers who had grown weary of exposed advances felt a renewed sense of control over their survival. The idea that one man could fire 60 rounds without being detected inspired others to experiment carefully, reinforcing a culture of skill-based adaptation. But the aftermath was not only tactical or psychological. The Germans began to adjust. Reconnaissance increased, and countermeasures such as tracer coordination and forward observation posts were emphasized. The battle demonstrated that innovation forced an enemy reaction. A small advantage demanded larger adaptations from opponents. The Leary Valley incident would be referenced in post-war studies as an example of field ingenuity, a case where an individual's observation and experimentation directly influenced both the conduct of a battle and the broader evolution of infantry tactics. By March 1944, reports from multiple Allied units confirmed the wider implications of the gunner's method. Flash suppression, once an improvised survival tactic, began to influence standard operating procedures. Small units were instructed to fire in controlled bursts, monitor barrel temperature, and consider terrain when positioning weapons. Even engineers took note, refining factory flash hiders to mimic the field techniques that had proven so effective. German intelligence struggled to adapt. Units that had previously relied on muzzle flashes to coordinate artillery strikes were forced to reconsider. Logs from German reconnaissance patrols describe invisible shooters that could not be traced, creating confusion and hesitation. Commanders warned that exposure could be deadly. Hesitation became a defensive necessity. The gunner's innovation had shifted initiative in subtle but tangible ways. The personal consequences for the corporal were modest but significant. He remained in the field, continuing to apply his method in subsequent engagements. Fellow soldiers regarded him with respect, not for heroics but for skill and foresight. Oral histories from the division describe him quietly demonstrating the technique to younger gunners, emphasizing patience, preparation, and observation. His actions became a living lesson in adapting technology to circumstance. On a broader scale, the incident reinforced a critical lesson about warfare. Innovation often originates in the field, not in boardrooms or factories. Simple adjustments, a dab of oil, a smear of mud, careful timing, could tilt a firefight, disrupt enemy calculations, and save lives. One man's understanding of physics and fire had rippled outward, influencing tactics, morale, and even technological development. By spring, flash suppression was formally documented and included in training manuals for Allied machine gunners. The Leary Valley engagement became a reference point, a reminder that success depended not only on firepower, but on intelligence, observation, and careful adaptation. Even after the battle, the image of the ghost gunner persisted, a symbol of ingenuity under pressure, a demonstration that warfare was as much about the unseen and calculated as it was about brute force. The story of the Leary Valley gunner is more than a single tactical triumph. It is a lesson in the interplay between human ingenuity and technology. In a war dominated by massive machinery, overwhelming firepower, and rigid doctrine, one man's careful observation, patience, and experimentation reshaped the battlefield in subtle but decisive ways. The technique of flash suppression demonstrated that survival, effectiveness, and influence could stem not from superior numbers, but from understanding the mechanics of one's weapon and the psychology of the enemy. In hindsight, the method foreshadowed a broader shift in warfare. World War II would increasingly reward small unit initiative, improvisation, and adaptive thinking. The corporal's approach highlighted the power of skill over brute force and of knowledge applied under pressure. It showed that the most effective weapons were not always the loudest or largest, but the ones wielded with intelligence, timing, and discretion. Beyond tactics and technology, the event resonates on a human level. It reminds us that courage is often quiet, and that innovation can emerge from necessity rather than design. The gunner did not seek fame. He sought survival, efficiency, and the protection of his comrades. In doing so, he left a mark on history that would influence training, doctrine, and the way soldiers approached the unseen dimensions of combat. The ghostly bursts that lit no sky, the rounds that came from nowhere, and the enemy forced into uncertainty. These are not just stories of war, but lessons in human ingenuity. In the silence after the firing, we see the quiet power of knowledge applied under pressure, and the enduring truth that even in chaos, skill and observation can shape history.